Welcome everyone to the Sisters Stories podcast. This podcast is aimed at marvelling at God's sovereignty in each of our lives as women and at encouraging one another via our stories. My name is Saskia and today I am joined by Sophie. First, can you tell us who you are?
So, hello, my name is Sophie. I'm a secondary school language teacher, originally from France, and I am almost 30, which is a little bit scary.
Oh. Nothing to be scared of.
I'm sure. We'll see when that happens.
So, today we are going to be talking about how you came to know the Lord Jesus Christ. But first off, could you tell us about what your childhood was like?
So, obviously, my childhood was in France, and so I was born in a non-Christian family. But my parents had exposure to Christianity through their parents, who were on both sides Catholic. Mm-hmm. So they were both brought up in the Catholic faith, going to church fairly frequently, going through confirmation and all of that. But it feels to me that they very much left the faith behind later on. So I was not brought up with any knowledge of the Bible, or very, very little, and nothing very enlightening, really, nothing that really struck me. So I had almost zero awareness of who Jesus was, which is quite something, I think, when you think about it. So I just didn't realize who he was at all. I knew the name, but I barely knew anything about him. So my childhood was also marked by my parents' divorce fairly early on, when I was, I think, about 6, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't really remember many things. And we moved around a lot. So we moved from the south of France to near Paris, and I spent most of my life around Paris, really, with my sister and my mom and my mom's partner. So it was quite a lot of moving around from house to house and things like that. So not the easiest, and the childhood where my dad was mostly absent as well, or at least distant enough that it felt like he wasn't really there, although we saw him in the holidays. So yeah, it took me a long time to kind of get to know him properly and to develop a relationship with him that was more than just being scared of him, really. So not that he's an unpleasant man, but just if you have someone who's a bit distant, as a child, it's not easy to warm to that person and to relate to them. But we have a much better relationship now, so
that's
good.
Yeah. And so how did you come to hear about the gospel, having no previous knowledge of it?
So that's really interesting. So throughout my teenage years, I would very much say that I had a deep awareness of sin, really, without actually knowing what it was. But it was quite discouraging for me and almost despairing, because I could feel very much that I was doing things wrong quite often, that other people were doing things wrong, as in quite serious things, lying, betraying people, being quite unpleasant. And so I had this quite negative view of people. I was probably a bit proud as well, thinking that was better, but I could still see that something was wrong. And I had no reference point to know if there was something else or if there was an answer to that. So I think there was something deep in me that was longing for something else. There was that gap that I was trying to fill somehow, and didn't really know where to turn. And it was quite scary in a lot of ways as a teenager, trying to find yourself and not really know how to piece things together. So there was that, and I was quite a curious person. I was keen to learn. I was fairly good at school. And so I would be fairly open-minded. So funnily enough, if someone had asked me what I believed back then, I probably would have given it some thought, but that didn't happen. So it's very rare in France that these questions actually get asked other than by Christians or by people who believe in something. So that was kind of what was going on in my head. And I came to university and I studied English, and especially English literature. And in my literature lessons, I soon found out that you needed to know about the Bible to understand all the references, especially in British literature.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Well, it became apparent when the teacher asked a question one day and I got it wrong. And someone said, oh, it's from this psalm or whatever it was in the Bible. Or from, I think it may have been Genesis or something like that. Anyway, and so I was like, oh, no, I don't know the answer to this. I was really annoyed, actually, which seems like a silly thing. But I wanted to learn and I wanted to know what the Bible was. And so exactly at that time, I had to select an options for my second year of university. And I selected a course about the Bible and literature.
Oh, wow.
Because, again, I wanted to know. And it sounded quite interesting. And exactly at that time, which was, God working behind the scene again, a person I knew from secondary school, who wasn't even my friend, really, or someone close to me, invited me to the CU, and we became friends through that. And so I came and I started reading. They were reading the parables in Matthew's Gospel. And this changed everything, obviously. It was quite interesting how suddenly I was in front of people who were loving, and I had to rethink what I knew of people. And I had to rethink that actually there are some people out there who have no motivation to be nice to me, who do not know anything about me, are welcoming, offering me food and drink and reading the Bible with me and helping me understand it. And that was very precious. So I just kept on going. That was October 2010, and I became a Christian very quickly after that, just from reading the Gospels, basically.
So is there a specific day when you gave your life to Christ?
Yes, there is, and I can tell you it was okay, that's a bit tricky, actually, sorry, backtracking. It was a weekend, so I think it was roughly the 6th of February 2011.
Wow, look at that.
So between the 4th and the 6th, but probably the 6th, I think. But what happened is that I kept on coming to the CU because, I think partly because I was not a very disagreeable person. And I was just like, this is nice. I'm having fun. These people are nice. I'm interested in this. I just keep on going. I didn't even think about it that much in my head. But at that weekend, so through reading the Gospels, there was something in me that really, it just came together very quickly. Just seeing who Jesus was very simply and just what he's done. I didn't even need to read that much more of the Bible to kind of put it together. And also, I remember reading at the end of John, when John says, this is a disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. And he carries on talking about more things. There was something in me that told me that no man could write this and lie. And I was just, there wasn't even a question in my head of, is this true or not? I read it, I was like, this seems like an honest account. And I want to know who this guy is, basically. So, and also, one of the parables that we read in Matthew, the parable of the 10 virgins, is very interesting because at the time, I think, again, very strangely, there was something in me that told me that I needed to be one of the wise ones. I needed to be in that wedding room, in that feast, and it wasn't very formulated in my mind. But I was like, I'm going to find the way to get there, and I did. So So on that weekend, I think that is when I prayed for the first time. I broke up with my boyfriend.
Oh, wow.
Because it was definitely not happening. And at the end of the weekend, we had to write a letter to ourselves, which the CU would send us a few months later. I don't know if I can... I think it was quite supernatural when I wrote that letter. I could definitely feel that it was not something I would have said of myself when I wrote. I could feel that something else was prompting me.
And now you know it's the Holy Spirit. So.
Yes, now I do.
Yeah.
And receiving it in God's providence, I received it exactly when I needed to hear these things again. Of like, basically, I think I wrote something like, what you studied is true and it's not something you can ignore. And yeah, so.
Wow, that's powerful. So how do you think this changed your life?
Wow, this is quite interesting. I think it made me a more optimistic person. There were some really dark times in my teenage years, especially at school, and times where I thought that things could not be mended almost, or, but somehow God showed me that I could leave people behind me and be fine.
Yeah.
And I could just, actually sometimes I needed to leave people behind me and find some better people to hang out with. And so I think he's really shown me that actually, again, I'm not the one fixing things, and he does. And he very graciously came to find me, which, I don't know, I can't explain more than that, really, but it's just amazing. So I think it really made me more hopeful. It gave me a purpose as well that maybe I hadn't quite got in my life. I didn't quite have. And I think it made me probably more generous as well to people, and more open-minded to them, and ready to give them a bit more the benefit of the doubt than previously. I think so, at least. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked a bit about your family life at the beginning, and how your parents had separated and things. How did your family react about your life changing in this way? And
yeah, it's quite interesting because I had they had some concerns, I think. My dad especially, because he could not see me like closely, at least. So I phoned him. I told him I had become a Christian. I explained to him how, etc.
Wow.
Which is probably the deepest conversation we've ever had, to be honest. He did say to me that he was a bit worried that I was in a cult, basically. Because in France, the CU is very unknown. It's practically unknown by most people, sadly, because it's a great organization. But it's about 100 groups all over France, which is great. But if you're not in a Protestant circle, you probably haven't heard of it. And Protestants are very few in France.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So to someone else's ears, it does sound a little bit like you're in the cult, because you're reading the Bible together. And obviously, the aim is to bring everyone to read the Bible. And whether you're Muslim, an atheist, or anyone is welcome to come to every single CU session to discuss it. So it's not at all like that. So the minute I explained that to him, he was more okay with it. Yeah, which was great. And coming to my baptism later on, he could see things, and it was much better. My mom and sister living with me, it suddenly felt like I had changed to them, at least in their eyes. The perception I have of it is that they thought I had changed in such a drastic way.
In a good way?
Maybe in a good way, but at least I escaped them somehow. And especially for my mom, I think that is difficult. And even to this day, that is difficult for her to get her head around that her girl is not hers completely anymore. And especially when you're basically a single mom, having raised your kids, I think that's quite difficult. My sister was a little bit aggressive at first, but I think has somehow grown out of it a little bit. I would say I'm not sure how to explain all these things, but it did feel that there was a little bit of tension there, at least. There were some questions occasionally, but not a deep interest at all until last year.
Interesting. So you said they were Catholic at the beginning, and so what's sort of happened with them now, and how is the relationship with your family now compared to then? And
well, I think now it's a little bit different, obviously, because I'm now in the UK. So I think there's even in some ways even more distant, although we're still fairly close. So I do think that there's a bit of an indifference to it more than hostility necessarily. I did read the Bible with my sister last year, so I read Luke's Gospel with her, which was great. But again, I don't think she was that interested in the end. So we did read most of it, which was good. But I think it kind of stopped there, and hopefully that's not the end of it, but we'll see. I think it's a similar relationship of a bit more distance and a bit more indifference, and it's the kind of topic that I might not mention that regularly. At least it's hard to get into a deep conversation about faith. I might mention church, but that kind of stops there. If I can, I'll try to dig a bit deeper, but it's not very easy in the conversation sometimes.
Yeah, but I guess in a way it's so like wonderful that they know that you are a Christian and that they can come to you and they can ask questions if they want to, and that you're there for them. Yes, exactly. So that's beautiful. And what has God taught you in this last year, this crazy COVID-19 year?
I think so. I've had quite a strange year in quite a few ways. The first lockdown, we were at home, obviously, so the school was closed. I was just working from home, which was quite a shock to the system. It was quite difficult, and I was struggling a little bit. But then in the second lockdown, more recently, I was at school, and I was with some colleagues, and we had more conversations, which was great. And I grew closer to them in a way, and it really made me realize, well, first of all, again, how not in control we are of the whole situation, but also how I really need to watch myself and not to let myself be influenced by the world around me, and not to adopt their way of talking, especially because talking is very easy to do, but then something comes out and you said the wrong thing, and I have to watch my mouth quite a lot. Not that I'm swearing or anything, but just in the way of portraying things in reality. And I think that really, God has really corrected me in that, and shown me how to try not to do that as much as I can, even if it means that I'm the unpopular one, which obviously isn't easy to take sometimes. But so that's something I try to carry on with as much as I can, but it's not,
That's so interesting. That must be so interesting at work, having this same experience with, going through this pandemic and having to do online classes and things in this way, and then everything being so different when you go back, and having those relationships with those teachers and things, and so interesting. But we don't follow the pattern of the world, do we? No.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what advice would you give younger Christians?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. I do think that it is extremely valuable to just read the words as much as you can. I mean, for me, I started by reading it in a more academic way almost, because I wanted to learn everything that was, well, not everything, but as much as I could about God. And I think that's very valuable, but reading it to teach yourself and to try to memorize things and try to put them into practice. And I'm still struggling with that. But I think that's why it's such a valuable thing to have. And it's obviously a very living word that affects us deeply. So that would be my first advice. But also, if you are maybe an older Christian, thinking about people who don't know Christ, I was one of the things I wish that someone had asked me when I was a teenager is actually, what do you believe? And I think sometimes we're hesitant to ask that question, which is quite a deep question and quite a thoughtful question, really. But I kind of wish that sometimes that someone had asked me that question, just to make me stop and think, what is actually anchoring you? What is actually the base of your life? Because I think that prompts so many things, so many deeper thoughts, and can really make people think. And I would say, don't hesitate to ask these deeper questions, even if it's not easy, because it might actually make someone pause and think about their life.
What do I believe?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Actually, I'm going to take that advice.
Great. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, well, thank you, Sophie, for
That's all right.
sharing your story with us. And that's all that we have time for in this episode of Sister Stories. Join us again next time.